Okay. Good morning, everybody. We're in the season preparing for Yomim Noraim. And one of the things that we do, usually around Rosh Hashanah time, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, is HaToras Nedarim. Try to, I guess, get permission to undo promises that we made that we may not have been able to keep, or certain practices that we established that we wanted to do and couldn't do. And of course, you have the communal HaToras Nedarim known as Kol Nidre, which was established in the 13th century by the Maharam of Rothenburg. A lot of interesting reasons why, possibly because a lot of people, especially in the Sephardic countries, were forced to accept Islam, and also in the Christian countries, there were forced conversions, but obviously the Jews didn't really mean it when they said it. So, but when you say something, it has significance. So the HaToras Nedarim or Kol Nidre may have been a response to those particular things. But I want to focus today on the whole notion of Nedarim. Nedarim is usually translated as vows or promises. And I'd like to explore a little bit with you the notion of Nedarim. It's one of the more difficult and arcane Masechtas in Shas, but there's an entire Masechta that deals with Nedarim. I won't go into all the details about it, but basically I want to focus on whether or not you should even make promises, under what circumstances. What is, if you accept a certain minhag or practice upon yourself, does that have the status of a neder, even though you didn't articulate it as such? And a little bit about HaToras Nedarim before Rosh Hashanah. So let's focus, first of all, on whether or not you should take a neder. Basically, should a person make a promise because he may not be able to fulfill that promise? And from a Torah perspective, whatever you say has a certain amount of significance. If you say something, then your words have meaning. The Torah in Bamidbar tells us, Ish ki yidor neder l'Hashem, if you make a promise to yourself, to Hashem, or Ishov Shvua, or you take an oath, Le'asor Isur al Nafsho, to, for example, to prevent yourself from doing, if I say, I'm not going to eat steak for the next 2 months, for whatever reason. Whatever you take upon yourself to do or not to do, the Torah says, Lo yachel devaro. You make a promise, you better keep it. You can't go back on it. Kechol hayotze mipiv ya'aseh. Whatever you say you're going to do, you have to do. Period. End of pasuk. So your words have significance and meaning, to the point which, in Sefer Koheles, written much, much later, is tremendous opposition to making promises. Kashatidor neder l'Hashem al ta'acher l'shalom. If you make a promise to make a donation, you better make it quickly. Don't delay fulfilling your promises. Ki ein chayfetz baksilim asher tidor shalem. No, Hashem has no patience for foolish people that make promises they don't keep. And because people are people, and because human nature is what it is, Tov asher lo tidor mishe tidor lo teshalem. It's better not to make a promise than to make a promise you can't keep. And the Gemara goes even further on that, as we'll get to in a moment. Basically, there's tremendous opposition to making the Nedarim. The Gemara very clearly comes down against it. Rav Meir, very clearly in the Gemara, Masechet Nedarim, says, you should not take a neder, period. Rav Yehuda says, if you do take it, you better make sure you fulfill it. And They go even further. If you make a neder, I'm going to donate $1,000 to the charity fund. Unless you have that $1,000 of disposable income available to you at that time, you can't make that neder. So they're very strong in their opinions about it. The Shulchan Aruch. Let's get down to the final psak halacha. Shulchan Aruch, Yeredeya, al tehi rogil min adorim. Don't get into the habit of making promises. Kol hanoder, anyone who takes an oath, anyone who makes promises, af al pi shemakaimo, and even if you fulfill that neder, nikra rosha v'nikra chote. Wow, that is very strong language in the Shulchan Aruch. Even if you make a vow and you fulfill it, you're still considered a Russia and a Chote. Well, that's a whole separate inyan. Whether or not you should take an oath to pledge money on Shabbos is one topic by itself. And Rav Sternbuch paskins that you're not allowed to say matana lebeis hakneses. Not allowed to say that because that's a bizoyon to the aliyah, to the Torah. You can't say matana. You have to specify him, and the minimum amount that he specifies is 18 shkolim minimum. But you shouldn't say matana.
Right away, so technically, can you actually
okay. Again, years ago, when Young Israel was first founded, part of the Constitution in every Young Israel synagogue was not to shnoder for Elias. That you weren't allowed to do it if you were a Young Israel synagogue. Now it's fairly common. It's wrong. It's right. You don't mix business with Shabbos. I think it's again. The shul needs money. I understand that. I just think it's an inappropriate use of an aliyah, which is a sacred event, theoretically, to use it as a fundraiser. I don't think it's appropriate, especially on Shabbos. Well, again, that's why people do it. They're given a kibbutz, so they donate in honor of that. It's very lovely, but yeah. And I once talked about that. The Hag Galila is probably more significant than the Aliyah itself in terms of the hierarchy of chashivus. But I think it's wrong to do financial transactions on Shabbos, even though. But again, shuls need the money. I understand this. We had this. Where's Milton? He's not here. One of the arguments we had many years ago across the street in the basement at a board meeting. When the shul was first started, I was opposed to it, and Milty would argue that, but the shul needs money, you got to do it. And so we do it. But clearly, when you make, how many times, I don't know, you know better than me. I mean, we try to keep track of all the aliyahs, how much people pledge. But very often, I would assume that some people don't fulfill their pledges. And that's what the Gemara is talking about, and what Kehelos is talking about. Better not to make promises than make a promise you can't keep. Yeah.
If a young boy, before he's bar mitzvah, makes a promise,
His parents have to pay
is
it.
that? I'm sorry.
His parents have to pay it.
His parents have to pay. Okay.
Yeah.
Is the same belief neder worth anything?
We'll come to that in a moment. Short answer is no. Yeah.
Many years ago, I got from the shul. Every time the shul made an appeal, there was one member who pledged $1,000 right away. He never gave a penny. I went over to him and I said, "Why do you pledge every single time and you don't give?" Because I was taken care of. making sure we got it all. And he said, I'm helping the shul in my way. By saying right away $1,000, I get the ball rolling.
Right, yeah.
Wanna, like try to match me. So
It's
they
like-
get more than they would have normally.
It's like at an auction, you want to bid up the price and you keep on raising it, and you hope that yours isn't the final one because you don't want to buy the object, but you're raising up the price. It's like bidding, yeah. But clearly,
Why?
yes, Nathan. This is a hot topic. Yeah, go ahead,
If a
Nathan.
young boy makes a pledge,
What's that?
you said that if a young boy makes a pledge, the parents have to fulfill it.
Yes,
Is that correct?
yes.
Well, suppose, I mean, so this seems to me, suppose the boy makes a pledge that's impossible for parents to fulfill, number one. Number two, I thought that a young boy who's not a mitzvah, how could he enter into a contract halakhically?
Well, again, he is not responsible financially, but if he makes a pledge, in terms of, and to use the loshon of a neder, that has certain significance, even though he's not bar mitzvah. But in general, it's the same thing. If a kid breaks a window when he's playing ball, the parents have to pay for the damages. The same type of thing. The parents are responsible. Hopefully, they'll raise their child in such a way that he won't obligate them in too many expenses. But clearly, parents are responsible for what their kids do. Yeah, Jared.
But just like a husband can negate a neder the wife makes,
Yes, yeah.
he can't do it with his kid.
It's not really, well, this is what Masechet Hadorim gets involved in. I mean, it's a whole shaklavataria. It's a whole discussion. It's not a simple topic. Yeah.
Just a question, in shuls where there are not a lot of Kohanim and Levitim,
Yes.
isn't it an undue pressure on the Kohanim and Levitim who constantly are getting aliyah and are put in a position, depending on the type of
Oh,
shul,
which is
that they have to give in the Java each time?
which is another reason why we shouldn't do it. Okay, let me try to go a little, but the Shulchan Aruch, the language of Shulchan Aruch is, if you make promises, whether you keep them or not, if you make a promise, you're called a sinner. Don't make promises, period. You want to do something, do something.
You're talking about a promise or a neder?
Neder and promises are pretty much the same thing. Yeah, I mean, again, you want to get technical, if you don't use the language of Kabbalah Saneder, so it wouldn't have as strong an impact. But if a person says, not the Torah's Neder, I promise to make a donation to the shul of $100, without doing it the Torah's Neder, saying, I take a vow to bring, it's almost the same thing. Pretty much the same thing. Bottom line is, don't make promises, period. And certainly don't make promises that you can't keep or don't keep. But even if you make a promise that you keep, the Shulchan Aruch says you are a Rasha, you are a Chote. Don't make promises. You want to do something? Do it. Don't make promises. Yeah. Even if you think it in your mind. I mean, verbalizing is the strongest, but even, for example, we are now in a period where people hopefully are reflecting on their behavior of the past year to try to improve upon it for the coming year. So if you say to yourself, you know what, not that I'm gonna try, but I'm going to go make minyan for mincha every day now. I'm gonna do that. That will be my change for this year. I will be in shul for mincha every day. That's a neder. That's a neder. And if you don't do it, you need Torah Stadorim. We'll come to that.
Suppose a person,
But
suppose a person says, beli neder.
Beli neder really doesn't mean anything. People do it. It's common, but we really don't do that. The Rambam, the Chochmas Adam, everybody, all the poskim are very much opposed to making promises you can't keep. I'll give you a classic example. In yeshiva, from 9 to 12, we reviewed the previous day's shiur, and then we prepared for the coming shiur. And from 1 to 3, the Rav would say shiur. And the Rav was known for going over his time limit all the time. And guys had to go to class. College began at 3. I mean, for those that were in that program, at 3 o'clock. Some guys started earlier if they weren't in a Talmud program. But 3 o'clock class, you had to be in class. Psychology, English literature, whatever you were taking. And very often the Rav went over, and his assistant would say, Rebbe, guys got to go to class. And most of the time, he would end up close to the time. All right. So that's why people knew not to schedule your first class until 4 o'clock, because he would always go. Anyhow, there's a Russian psachim that talks about the topic of the Shema for matzah. Oh, the whole topic. And the Rav was struggling with it. And he couldn't get to where he wanted to go. So he said, okay, I know you have to go to class. I'll finish it tomorrow. Everybody left. The next day, again, working through the rush, he couldn't resolve what was a problem in his mind. But yesterday, he said, I'm going to finish it today. So he said to the guys, bring in Rabbi so-and-so and Rabbi so-and-so. And he brought in 3 Rosh Yeshiva, and he did HaTaras Nedarim. Because he said he was going to do something, and he didn't do it. That was the greatest lesson.
What's the difference between saying you're going to do something and mamish promising? A lot of times we wake up and go, oh, I'm going to finish doing this. But it's no rice zach. You're just saying, oh, this is what I have to do today. This is the list of things to accomplish.
So
it's not even a promise.
Then make sure your expectations are realistic, and you finish what you say you're going to do. You don't have to articulate it. If you know what your daily schedule is going to be, you can write it down. Again, if you want to be very technical, if you don't do it for Torah's neder and use the language, but even if you don't, the Rav didn't say, I took a neder. He just says, but Kol Moses Vasecha Tishmor, Torah says, whatever comes out of your mouth, you have to do. That's why there were a few Hasidic Rebbeim didn't talk. Because they measured their work. It's a novel, the whole notion, think about it. It's a novel notion of measuring the words that you say. Think before you open your mouth.
Writing something down. Say it.
Yeah, writing it down is, you want to make a list? Again, it's not B'Torah's neder.
You can also say it's the best of my ability.
Yeah, okay, so again, that's where the belief that's where the belief neder comes in. And people think that belief neder means that you don't have to, but it's not really true. It's not really true. El Yashiv and other poskim, they very, very clearly that belief neder really doesn't have any meaning. There's one heter. There is one heter that some people try to utilize. Basically, if you are in a time of crisis, then you are allowed to make promises, theoretically. So this is the only possibility. If you are in a crisis, you say, if so-and-so comes through surgery, I will give X amount to the shul. Or if you are in a time of crisis, and some of them before us, the Rishonim point out that Yomim Noroim is technically a time of crisis. Life and death are at stake here. So you make promises to be better, to do certain things that you didn't do perhaps in the previous year. So some have a custom of making the Dorim promises during this time period, especially to enhance religious observance and so forth. The Rosh is an interesting concept here. He says that in a time of crisis, he says a neder is similar to taking strong medicine. Whereas normally you don't need it, and you shouldn't use it. It's not healthy to take medicine when you don't need it. But if you need it, it can be helpful. That's how he rationalizes taking neder and making promises during a a time of crisis. Again, when you make a promise in your own mind, you don't use language of Torah's neder. People are generally not that precise and not that careful about it, unless you are a person who is precise and careful about how he behaves or what he says. There's an interesting discussion among Achronim, actually, Eshel Avram and a few others, and this comes into discussion we had before about schnorring at an aliyah. If you have a good collection system, and people pay up, then he might wiggle a heter for making nedarim or schnorring at an aliyah. If a collection system is not that good, and people don't always pay up, then it's much more problematic, because you're putting people in a position of making promises that they may not keep, which is a serious halakhic issue. Let's see. There's a fascinating Gemara I want to share with you, if I can find it here. The Gemara tells you shouldn't, and the Torah tells you, don't make promises. Don't make promises, especially if you can't keep them. What is the halachic source for the Dorim altogether? Whether you should make it, you shouldn't make it. In Chagig, it's a Mishnah, statement of halacha. Chagiga daf Aleph. Look up. It says heter nedarim, the permission to make nedarim. Parkim bi'avir are flying around in the air. Ve'ein lahem al ma sheyismachu. There is no basis. There's no textual basis for hatoras nedarim. There is no textual basis. We do it. It's a minhag. And we go to a bezdin, and we ask them for permission to forgive promises that we may have made, or things that we said we were going to do that we couldn't accomplish. There's no basis for it. We do it. Every shul in the world does it. Every shul in the world says kol nidre, but there is no textual halachic. Parkim ba'avir, it's floating around in the air. It's a Mishnah. Going way back then, they understood that this was a practice because, unfortunately, people are people, and people make promises very often that they are unable to keep.
How do you become such a big, I mean, like, Kol Nidre, if we could do a drum roll before, we would do a drum roll.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty major, and now you're saying I'm not, but the Mishnah is saying that there is no Hatara, it's a and no.
There is hataras nedarim, but it does not have a textual basis. I mean, we again, when you make a promise, you have to keep it. But you're better off not making. The Torah says it, the Nevi'im say it, the Gemara says it. Don't make promises, period, because you never know if you can make. Let's assume a guy normally keeps his word. I'm going to learn an extra parak of Mishnah every day, and he does it. But then he gets sick and he's in the hospital for 2 days, and he can't do it. It requires a Torah Nedarim.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Again, it depends. If you just do it, no. If you just do it without saying I vow, but again, this is, you ask where it comes from, precisely because people can't always keep the promises that they make. So the rabbis came up with this process where you go before a bezdin, and the bezdin accepts your regret not being able to do it. And if you look at the language of Hataras Nedarim, it's not just promises, but minhagim that you took upon yourself, things that you said you would do. that are not necessarily articulated. Minhagim. I want to change my minhag. Can I do that? Do I require Hataras Adorim?
Look at this one.
Let's say I move to
Sylvia,
a neighborhood.
why do you
and
do
the
that
only
when you
shul
know that
that's
I'm-
there is Nusach Sfard.
You're so selfish. Why would you do
Do I
that?
have to?
You don't let me even.
Hataras Adorim.
I could be bleeding. I can't
It's
bother you when you're going
Ashkenaz,
too fast, but
but
you
you
have
do.
the chutzpah.
You do, anyway.
No, chutzpah. You yell at me.
Mhm.
Chutzpah.
Yes.
Isn't it in the Torah where you could,
I can't hear you.
isn't it in the Torah?
Yes.
It tells you can't annul your wife's spouse.
That's a different situation that has to do with the halachos of marriage. That's a different category. It's not that because you become, I would guess, you can control certain things that your wife says, theoretically. Right? Practically speaking, husbands probably can't control what their wives say. But theoretically, you can control certain things that your wife does, at least halachically. Yes.
I learned that you can change from Ashkenaz to Sfard, but changing from Sfard to Ashkenaz is a problem.
No, you can change both ways. The only question is whether it requires a Torah Sedorim or not. And in some cases, if I recall correctly, Rav Moshe discusses this issue, but there's a whole question of whether or not that requires a Torah Sedorim. If there are many examples you could bring. If a person always does X and he decides to do Y, does that require a Torah Sedorim? Again, strictly speaking, whatever a behavior that you want to change, if you took it upon yourself as a specific minhag, or you just do it, there are differences. If I happen to belong to a shul which does X, and all of a sudden I move to a neighborhood to another shul which does Y, it may or may not require Hataras Nedarim. Again, Hataras Nedarim itself doesn't exist halachically. Practically, it does exist. We all do it. But the halachic basis for it is very, very schwach.
Aren't rabbis allowed to make certain changes?
It depends on what kind of change, but here they're not making a change. Here they're saying, we, as a group of a bezdin, 3 rabbis or 3 balabatim in this case, but forming a bezdin, we understand you took upon yourself a practice, a minhag, or a vow to do something, and you weren't able to do it. So we release you from that promise. Okay? In practical terms, we do it. Does it have a textual basis? Other than the strength of age-old minhagim. Every shul does kol nidre. Where'd that come from? Until the Maharam of Rutenberg, 13th century Germany, you didn't have kol nidre. Good reason to establish it, because of all the forced conversions. But before, what's the halakha? Again, this is a whole separate discussion, perhaps for another shiur. The scope of rabbinic authority to establish practices is a huge, huge topic. Rabbis have tremendous, tremendous power to institute practices. Very often they've done it, and we do those things like Hatar Sadar and Kol Nidre is a classic example. There are many areas where rabbis could do more, but they don't for whatever reason. Or issue of aguna, there are so many things they could do that for some reason they're reluctant to do. I don't know why. But rabbinic authority is tremendous in this regard. Hatar Sadar is one example of rabbinic authority where they established a practice that is beneficial, but is on very shaky technical halachic grounds. But it just points out the strength of communal practices. Once they're established, it's very hard to unestablish it. I use that, yeah.
I just want to go back to this whole thing and, making it a dova. I've only been in Shomrei for 3 years. So has any rabbinic authority ever more than once, or at least once, made the whole topic of following through of when you say you're going to give an agava, whether it's a matana or a specific sum, that, you know, it's not like saying, oh, I'll take vanilla over chocolate, that it really has some basis to it in terms of following through and the importance. I mean, with all due respect to the 50 million zillion other halachas and Rabbi X and Rabbi Y said this and that on the parsha, you know, Ben Adam L'Chaveiro, hello.
You're 100%.
Ben Adam L'Chaveiro.
You are 100% correct. If you have a situation, as you did in certain countries in the Middle Ages, where the chief rabbi of the city was appointed by the king, right? And the rabbi could do or say whatever he wanted as long as the king wasn't upset. And he can go and issue a decree that if anybody makes a donation promise and doesn't keep it, we throw him into jail. They can do that. Today, rabbis are contract employees. All right, and if a rabbi comes out in the shul and he says something that's going to upset too many balabatim, he's out. His contract won't be renewed. So it's a different ethos that's at work here. Rabbis have to. I'll just conclude with a very famous story about a community who hires a new rabbi. You must have heard the story before. New rabbi comes to town, and the first Shabbos he has a drasha about the importance of kashrus. And the president takes him aside after and says, Rabbi, our members, they go to business meetings and they travel a lot. Kashrus is not a big item on their agenda. I really soft pedal it. Okay, next Shabbos, he gets up and talks about mikveh as an important topic. And the rabbi takes him and says, Rabbi, you know, that's an old-fashioned thing, you know, that's not a thing in our shul. We're not really big on mikveh. Fine. Next week he gets up and he talks about Shmiras Shabbos, how important that is. And again, the rabbi takes him aside and says, Rabbi, come on, it's the 21st century. Shabbos, you know, people want to play golf, they want to go easy on that kind of stuff. So he says, what should I talk about? He says, talk about something Jewish. So you raise a very good point. There are some rabbis who've been in their shuls for a long time who have tremendous latitude to pretty much say whatever they want to say, but it doesn't always exist. And sometimes people have different priorities. And what works in one shul may not work in another shul. And that's the politicization, in other words, of the rabbinate in America. And rabbis are hired to give advice, but they have to be careful which advice they give, because if people aren't willing to listen to the advice, then you lose more than you gain. The whole issue of schnorring for aliyos has come up, but we don't do it during the week. Why not? People have to go to work. It would prolong the service. So why should we prolong the service on Shabbos? People should go home to their families, more time to learn, spend time with your family. I fought that battle a long time ago and lost. So maybe it's time to raise the issue again. Anyway, be careful what you say, because you're going to be held to it. That's the lashon of neder. Okay, have a great day.
Washed.
I did. Rabbi Sign of Orech, Yishen Orach B'Tov Yad Allah, Shos Kol Subin Kan, Orech Shechal Mishalo. Baruch she'achal mishalo k'vachayinu, Baruch atah ne'melech hazon Yisrael v'kol chasto, u'v'tuvo hakadosh tamid lo chasmai. Ki hu elzon afanes la kol mitiv la kol mitim hazon kol b'riyasa v'ashevara, Baruch atah Adonai hazon es hakol. Baruch atah Adonai al haaretz v'al hamazon. Uvenei Yerushalayim ira kodesh me'eva v'yameinu. Baruch atah Adonai b'nei berachamo v'Yerushalayim. Amen. Rachman v'chaim v'shalom kol tov v'mikol tov li'olam ha'yachasreinu. Okay.
They ask me to bench.
Oh, wow.
Usually makes it Torah Sedora. Right, yes.
Cousin for the president was here and he came to our venue.
Left to get in front.
Okay, I trusted Darren there.
He told me he wanted me to bench.
Yeah. So I gave him an aliyah, and at that time, decided that if anyone said Matana, we'd give them a number.
Exactly.
So here we have this little card with paper clips, something else.
Doing the whole lunch.
But we have
his
every once in a
cousin
while when we have.
who was complaining to everybody. There's such a big stink about this. To the point, you know, one thing I don't like about Shiur
Asking for money on Shabbos.
it's not the subject. He ended up basically.
No, he was a guest.
I'm Mochel.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So he eliminated the whole procedure now. After that, the Shabbos were not able to give out for this one guy. So to make such a big thing. And the assistant rabbi, Rabbi Shulman, said the guy is wrong. Because exactly what he said, you're not allowed to even really say matana. You're supposed to give something to get an aliyah. It was just unbelievable. This whole thing.
I know the shul needs the money.
See, I went to the young Israel. I got the our nephew. It was built into the dues. First of all, they had so many people, and they always ran the million in the surplus.
But actually, what I said about the Kohanim and Levim, it's a rachmanis on them if they're supposed to give something each time, and